Hello friends, neighbors, and fellow VEDSies. Welcome to day 13 of VEDS and day 2 of me tackling the various challenges that were set by the various VEDSies. Yes, I am wearing the same shirt that I was wearing yesterday because I'm filming this on the same day that I was filming yesterday, which was yesterday. But this shirt is actually a little bit more appropriate for this video, as you'll find out here in a minute. So today's challenge is the challenge set by James F., which is to take a look at one of our favorite books or movies or possibly stage musicals and give a pitch of how we would make a sequel or a reboot of that thing, kind of like there have been a lot of sequels and reboots of various things from the past, like Star Trek and Star Wars and a bunch of other things that I talked about in my canon video. And when I first heard this challenge, I have to admit that the first thing that came to mind was one of my favorite movies of all time, Back to the Future. Now, the reason why this was troubling to me is because I have been a pretty strong opponent to anyone ever making any kind of a sequel or remake to the Back to the Future trilogy, because I feel like they did it great to start with. You can't really beat the original. I don't feel like there's any way to improve it or add to the story or anything like that, and so I don't feel like a remake really needs to be made. But the thing about me is that once I get a thought in my head, it's very difficult for me to not see it through to its natural conclusion, and I started actually thinking about what a really good remake of Back to the Future would look like. So first of all, it would be a reboot and not a sequel. I don't feel like we need to add anything more to the original story from the first 3 movies. I would want to do a reboot, and I wouldn't even necessarily want to have it be in the same universe as the original trilogy. Or it could be one of those situations where it could be in the same universe as the original trilogy, but you only know that through some sort of oblique references to the original trilogy and not necessarily because we actually see Marty or Doc or anything like that. So it would be a reboot, and there have been a lot of really good reboots lately, and what I'm finding is a consistent quality of those reboots is that they manage to find a balance between the nostalgia from the original thing that they're rebooting and also updating the story for a new generation of viewers. So what we would first need to figure out with Back to the Future is what to keep the same about it and what to change about it. So broadly speaking, I think there are 3 main things that keep people coming back to watch Back to the Future. First, the relationships between the characters, specifically the friendship between Marty and Doc. Second, the nostalgia factor. Nostalgia for the 50s was big in the 80s. And third, the uniqueness of the premise, which had never really been done before and really hasn't been done since. And I'm not just talking about time travel, I'm talking about the premise of having someone go back in time and meet their parents when they were their own age. That's really at the heart of Back to the Future. Marty McFly goes back and he meets his own father and mother when they were teenagers, when they were his age, and he finds out what they were like when they were kids. So those key aspects I would want to keep basically the same. I'd want to have a strong friendship between the Doc character and the Marty character, and I'm going to refer to them in their original names, even though we probably wouldn't use those original names in the reboot. I would want to maintain nostalgia, though it wouldn't be nostalgia for the 50s, it would probably be nostalgia for the 80s or 90s, because we'd be going back to that time period. And I would want to keep that main premise, although instead of having a baby boomer parent and a Generation X kid, we would have a Generation X parent and a millennial kid, because that would open up all sorts of storytelling doors here. And that gets into some of the things that I would change or update about the original story, because as much as the premise is very universal and very timeless, there are a lot of aspects of this movie that very much mark it as an 80s movie. And I'm not just talking about the pop culture references. Actually, there really aren't that many pop culture references, or at least not so many that it's distracting. But to me, it's more of an 80s movie because the message and kind of the overall tone is kind of materialistic. The whole sort of ending note for the movie is Marty gets everything that he ever wanted. He gets the girl, he gets the new car, he gets all this stuff. And that sort of message, I think, is not going to play quite as well in the 2010s. So what could we do to this story in order to update it for a new audience? I'm come up with 3 ideas. The first idea is very simply to switch the perspective of the story. Instead of telling it from the point of view of the Marty character from the present day, we tell it from the point of view of the past characters, from the past Doc and the past George McFly. Why would we do this? Just because it would make it stand out from the original story. And I do think that there are a lot of great storytelling opportunities in telling it from the point of view from the past. If we tell it from the past, then it becomes a story about this kid who's trying to change and trying to get this girl to like him, but doesn't really know how to do it until this sort of mysterious kid comes and sort of teaches him how to be a better person and whatnot. Or it could also be simultaneously the story of this guy who's trying to invent a time machine, and then this kid from the future shows up and claims that he's friends with him and needs him to get him back to the future. And I think it would be really interesting to introduce this Marty character without actually seeing him in his own present-day environment, just to get kind of hints at what his home life is like and what his life is like back in the present day. And he could also make some references to things that are going on in the present day so that we know he's from our time. The second change that I would make is I would change the nature of the relationship between Marty and his father. In the original movie, Marty basically looks at his father as a loser who never stands up for himself and just lets everybody walk all over him and does whatever they want. And in the past, he tries to teach his father how to be tougher and to stand up for himself and to just kind of be a stronger person that his mother will actually like because he'll be strong enough to take care of her. But that's another one of those things that I think is not going to play as well today, partly because that sort of machoism isn't really glorified as much anymore, and also because it's just the tiniest little bit sexist. A little bit. So what I would do is I would kind of swap the personalities a little bit and have the Marty character maybe not be a loser, but not be quite as cocky as the Marty character from the original movie, and have the father kind of think of his son as being kind of a loser and kind of not strong enough and wanting him to be a little bit more macho and a little bit more hardworking and stand up for himself and all that sort of thing. And that would get into some of that Gen X millennial tension that exists today too. And so when Marty goes into the past, maybe he could teach his father to be a little bit more sensitive, a little bit more romantic, to try to win the mother over just by being a nice guy and not by being a guy who can beat the crap out of all the other guys. And the third change that I would make, and hear me out on this one, I would make the father African American. Partly because, yes, it would be really nice to have a little bit more racial diversity in the movies, but partly because that would mean that it would be an interracial relationship in the 1980s, which, while not unheard of, was unusual enough that it would probably lead to some raised eyebrows, particularly from the person who would be our Biff Tannen in the movie, who would not so much be the delinquent typical bully in this version, but would be the golden boy, would be the pretty white boy, would be the kid that everybody loves and everybody believes, while the father, in contrast, might look like a little bit more of a hoodlum, partly because he's black, and partly because he is a little bit defensive and tends to fly off on the handle and doesn't have real good control over his emotions. That would also make the relationship between the father and the mother a little bit more fragile and a little bit more easy to endanger by their future son being present in the story. Maybe in the original timeline the mother stayed with the father because, you know, she wanted to piss off her dad or something. I don't know. She wanted to be the rebel and she wanted to see this through because she wanted to show her parents that they didn't own her. But then when Marty comes back in time, she actually sees George McFly not as somebody to be a rebel with, but somebody who she could actually come to fall in love with and form a relationship with. I don't know, I think that this would make for a lot of great storytelling opportunities. It would send a really, really strong message about race relations, both in the 80s and today. And, I mean, there's absolutely nothing wrong with more diversity in the movies. I would love to see more diversity in the movies. So that's my pitch for the Back to the Future remake. I very much doubt that it will ever happen in this or any incarnation, but it was kind of fun to think about what it might look like if it did. So thanks for the challenge, James F. Tomorrow I will be doing the last challenge from Coded Lock Films, the songwriting challenge, and I'm actually gonna do that like here after I turn off the camera, but you'll see it tomorrow. And so until then, friends and fellow VEDSies, see you later.